Welcome to What's Your Point with Colin Barnes and Graham Mills. In this series of podcasts, we will use a famous statement or quote from the world of sport to start our conversation and bring light to a topic. Our goal is to dispel myths and make the truth stick. Come join us in the discussion. As we go into the elite environment, we will be using a Michael Jordan quote from one of his Nike adverts from 2008. This is in response to many Nike adverts in the late 80s and 90s that starred both Jordan and Spike Lee playing his role as Mars Blackman. Mars is famously known for his phrase, "It's gotta be the shoes." Here's what Jordan said.
It's not about the shoes. It's about what you do in them.
Okay, so we're here today to talk about a quote, this time from Michael Jordan, who in a Nike commercial back in 2008 said, "It's not about the shoes, it's what you do in them that counts." So we're going to try and link that to the elite player performance plan and the idea that it's about the best being with the best in the best facilities with the best coaches. In youth development, it might not be that clear cut, and it's not about the superficial things, the bricks and the mortar, the buildings, the nice things with bells and whistles on. It's actually perhaps a bit more subtle than that, and it's more about the people in those environments, the culture, the vision, the values, the living traditions, the attitudes and beliefs that probably go into all these buildings and facilities that we see now. Not so much the superficial things that we can see, like the state-of-the-art gyms and beautiful manicured pitches and things like that. So first of all, probably the start point is to try and understand exactly what we mean by elite. What does the term elite mean? Because it's in the title, Elite Player Performance Plan. I think it's listed, is it about 36 times in the plan? But yet there's no real clear definition as to what elite is. So maybe that's our start point. Have you got a quote that or a definition of elite?
Yeah, the easiest way is we go into our dictionary version, and it is defined elite: a select group that is superior in terms of ability or qualities to the rest of a group or society. And we take that dictionary approach, and I think the selection of Michael Jordan, especially after The Last Dance, and maybe the cultural understanding of how good Michael Jordan was, might somewhat get lost in England, where basketball isn't as prevalent. But there's no athlete that I've seen other than maybe Tiger Woods that has come anywhere close to the ability to take over. And we're going to be talking about these terms, elite and world class, and he absolutely demonstrated what the best of the best should do. And it's great that someone like him, I think you talked about it earlier with Cantona, with previous players, that they were the best at what they did, and yet they valued training. And he obviously coined a bunch of sayings. He had a shoe that basically changed the game for one company, and changed it for how sneakers or trainers are worn throughout the world. And yet it didn't matter to him in this quote. It was more about what you did and how you trained it. So yes, we're talking about the elite, which is a separate superior group, but what constitutes that at the development level at the clubs is going to be what we're addressing today.
Yeah, and we learnt last week in the podcast about players that reach the elite level in senior sport aren't necessarily the ones that are selected at youth level. I think it was 2/3 of the ones that actually make it to the elite aren't selected in youth programs. So where does that identification come in, and at what age? can you be an elite player at 12 years of age, for example, when really we probably know from the research that we talked about last week is the reality is that player is no longer going to be there by the time they get to the senior game. So in terms of youth development, we've talked about the Charter for Quality, and we're here today to talk about the EPPP and build upon Michael's lecture from Tuesday. And obviously the purpose of the Charter for Quality was the best coaches with the best players in the best facilities. And Howard Wilkinson himself, who designed and was integral to the Charter for Quality, said that he envisaged only probably 12 to 14 academies. The rest would have been centres of excellence. But actually, after that audit process, they ended up with 40 clubs. So 40 clubs actually of what would be deemed as elite facilities or venues for players to develop. And in his own words, he felt that the country wasn't big enough and didn't have enough talent to support 40 elite centres. So I guess if we use the dictionary definition of the select percentile or that top 1%, how do we feel about the fact that there's now, I believe, 26,
yeah.
I think Michael said 26 Cat 1 academies in the country. So that's clearly not the top percentile that would meet that definition of elite. Is that a problem in itself?
Well, we addressed this in our, I guess I don't think it was our first one, but when we talked about the super clubs.
Yeah.
Right? And so we even defined, okay, there's clubs and then there's the super clubs, the ones that can actually win a Champions League in that given year. And we kind of defined Liverpool as not being one until only a few years ago. Then you add in Chelsea, they're not quite there. So it is the cream of the crop idea. But when we apply that same definition, that same rigorous, here's the line in the sand, value system with youth development, it doesn't come across the same way simply because of the evaluation of potential versus current talent. And I think the question was asked about it. I think it might have been Carl that did that this week during the guest lecture, and it was around the same lines, like, well, this is an elite if 26 teams, clubs can get into it. Yeah. Do you see this as a bad thing? And Michael talked about, actually, this is a really good thing because the country is divided up into certain areas that, can't house as many, programs. So, and then you add in the difficulties that you just mentioned that, people might be identified as being elite at the younger ages, but may not actually continue to be elite. And so it's a case of, yes, we use that term maybe too loosely. In America, the joke with clubs is every team is called elite. So they're the the Tottenham Blast elite, and everyone thinks that they're just incredible because of that. And I think that there's a portion of us right now, maybe we use it too much, and this is why you and I are going to have to go in and go, okay, what does it really mean elite? And by what you said with Howard Wilkinson's, okay, the best coaches, the best environments, the best facilities in one place. So what does the best coach look like? What is that definition then?
For a coach, I think probably for me personally it would be around the humanistic and personal values that coach possesses. Now we look at elite coaches from different eras. The Alex Ferguson type manager, you look at, if you were to lift him and put him into today's game, it may not be as successful. And we're seeing now coaches like Klopp coming through and being very successful, and they, lots of writing about them in terms of the way that they make players feel and how he creates an environment where they thrive from being coached by him and his personality. So we see that that's becoming more and more important. If we look at sort of a lot of the research done on elite coaches, it tends to be on 3 fairly rigid criteria, which I think is problematic in itself. It'd be good to get your thoughts, but coaches' win record is one of them, probably the most used or most cited. Then their involvement at national or international level, and then after that is number of years, so that 10,000 hour sort of idea, or 10 years. If they tick that box, then they're deemed to be elite. Obviously the problem with that is, some nations aren't as strong as others, so you could be the international manager of a team that's very low on the FIFA rankings, but yet you may still be regarded as elite because you're an international or a national manager. Win-loss records, again, in youth development is not necessarily important, and it also reflects perhaps the league that you're in. So we know some leagues aren't as competitive as others. What do those wins look like? Are they sort of a win at all cost mentality? So again, there's some grey areas around that, and through our discussion so far, I think we've talked about the 10,000 hour rule, but it's not necessarily the hours that you accumulate, but it's the quality of those hours and what those hours look like. So again, to say that one coach is elite and one isn't because of the number of hours they've got on their sort of clock, if you like. Guardiola only had one season at Barcelona B, then went and won every trophy there was to be won. He'd only been coaching for a year, 18 months, but yet I think we'd all agree that he was elite in terms of what he managed to achieve at Barcelona in his first couple of seasons. So I think it's a very grey area, but I think the thing that's starting to come through, especially in today's society and the way sport is and the way athletes now are, I think you need to be personable. Those personality characteristics, the skills to be able to communicate, are becoming more and more important. I don't see the hairdryer type manager that is the very autocratic. I see them, perhaps you use the example of Sam Allardyce, can come in and you get a bounce and you get a reaction, but it doesn't seem to have the longevity that perhaps it once did. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, then how the part that kind of like our super clubs argument, it wasn't fixed. It was kind of evolving. I mean, was Claudio Ranieri, was he an elite coach? And right now, obviously, we're talking about the managers at the top side, not talking about the elite youth coaches that are in the academies that are producing or helping players along this pathway. So if we take the argument, let's look at managers and how do we define them. Unfortunately or fortunately, the best measure, and you started off right, winning percentage. What champions, what have they won? What trophies are they bringing in? Because if they don't bring in the trophies, we naturally say, well, they're not doing a good job. When it could have been that, right now, David Moyes is doing the best job in the Premier League because he's got West Ham winning in succession when they look terrible to begin with. So we have this idea that winning means that you're doing something right, and it's not a bad assumption, but we do need to be aware that you could be winning with a lot of really good talent, and the actual job of coaching is a lot more difficult to say. When it comes to the youth coaches, the same sort of thing is applied. What makes a great youth coach? Well, it's how many players they're producing, meaning how many players are they getting credit for? And that's the problem that it poses on young coaches, is that they want to attach themselves to players that will get international access, whether it's youth internationals, whether it's they're going to this club, they're going to that club, because then they can say, I coach Jadon Sancho, I coach whoever, and it makes them feel or it appear to be the greatest coach ever. when it should be a little bit more, as you stated. It was about, you know, the development of human beings. It was the relationship that you're building, and you know, we have a superficial version of what success looks like when it comes to coaching.
Yeah. And
the people who recognize that and attach themselves to certain clubs or certain players are going to move up that ladder, which is, you know, part of the game, I guess is the best way to say it. You know, we've been down our coaching pathways and seen people rise really quickly, and they may not have had what you would consider the personable skills, the technical knowledge on coaching or the mechanics of coaching compared to others, but they still rose. And I think that's where this elite, you know, definition comes in, where it's very one-sided to success. That's what we naturally do in the short term.
Yeah, and because win-loss is so fragile, I guess, in a team environment where there's so much, you know, complexity, variables that are going on, especially with VAR and the sort of changing rules around handball now, you see the difference between a win and a loss can be, you know, it can be beyond your control sometimes, that fine margin. So again, it sort of puts debate to that win-loss record, and also experience. I don't know, you know, how do you get experience if you need to accumulate 10 years to be able to get to be deemed as elite? You know, we see young coaches, Frank Lampard, you know, clearly not the finished article, but how is he going to become elite or even challenge or threaten to become elite if we don't give these young coaches opportunity to try?
What do you think about Gerrard at Rangers?
Well, I think he's probably had a fantastic route to management, because he worked at Liverpool for a season or two with the youth team there. So in an environment where win-loss is not so important, for a club like Liverpool, obviously they want to strive to win, but it's an environment where he's not in the limelight, he's not being assessed, he's not being critiqued, he's given time to be on the grass, to develop experience, to refine his identity as a coach and start to formulate his philosophy. And then he's gone to a league in Scotland which, you know, with the exception of Celtic and Rangers, yes, there's other clubs that occasionally compete, but it's a league where he's not going to be judged too critically. If he finishes in the top two, you know, that is what is expected of him in a league which doesn't have 5 or 6 clubs sort of vying for the championships each year. So he's gone to a country where he's perhaps not under the microscope. You know, in Glasgow it's intense. You know, I'd imagine the pressure on him from fans is intense. So I'm not saying he's taken an easy route, but he's taken a route where he, you know, can develop his own identity.
You got the Old Firm this weekend, is that right?
It is, yes.
Okay.
It's a great time to bring it up. But yeah, I think in a couple of years' time of working in that environment, of getting opportunities to go to Europa League, I think he'll be in a great position to be able to then go and take the next step, wherever that might be. But there is some research that does exist from sort of Collins, McNamara and McCarthy, and they do actually look into that personal side of coaching and what makes them elite. So they've looked at things like advanced communication skills and the ability to come up with innovative problem-solving solutions in high-pressured moments, and the ability to self-reflect, or emotional intelligence. So they found from their research that the thing that defined elite practitioners wasn't necessarily the win-loss record, it wasn't necessarily the experience, it wasn't necessarily the whether you're an international manager, it was more around those sorts of things.
So it's not the business card, it's not the nameplate, it's, you know, how you act and your skill set as a we talk about different kinds of knowledge, and you've got the interpersonal knowledge and you've got the intrapersonal knowledge. So it's the inter is, you know, how you're dealing with others, and you relationships with the players, the other staff, everything like that. And then there's the within yourself and your reflection, as you said, and those skill sets. When was that explicitly talked about in any of your coaching badges, education path?
I think the badges in England have changed a lot since I probably started the pathway, but certainly not until I was on my A licence that those sorts of things started to at least come into my consciousness. It was very much technical, tactical, and to be deemed a good coach you needed to know all the answers around technique and principles of play and tactics. Never did I really consider the social or the psychosocial side of coaching, and because coaching is a social process, it probably is the most important part. So we should actually be starting with that. Understand how to communicate concisely, get your point across, express yourself appropriately, manage your emotions, all those sorts of things that are going to help you develop rapport, relationship, and any environment you're in. If you know that the person that you're working with is supportive of you, but also will challenge you, so you've got that nice balance of support and challenge, you're going to thrive. But probably when I started out coaching, I didn't have any regard for that. It was about telling the players what they needed to know. I was the font of the knowledge, and perhaps neglected the importance of creating a contact. So for me now, it's contact before content. That's the way that I would approach coaching now, but it's taken me a long time to get to that point. If I'd have started off with that, I might be a different coach, I might be doing different things, whatever, but that would be my advice to someone starting out.
I mean, to your point, it's the same way. I valued the coaches that I thought were great, the ones that I wanted to be mentored, the ones that I sought information, wanted to see their sessions. It was all about the content. It was what were they saying, what was their tactical ideas, how were they creating these activities to train this and that. And the longer it goes, the more learning that I do on my own. It's all about the how do you treat people, how do you manage the social side, and
how do you make them feel?
I care more about the interactions than I do about the content. In any of the sessions that we run, it's how do they come away with it, because you can come up with some great content. The activities you can come up with are wonderful, and yet it all goes to waste when you haven't treated someone correctly, or you've ruined their experience where they go home feeling terrible of whatever the reason. And the problem, I guess, could be that it's a competitive sport. We all want to go out there and win and do whatever, and we take this mentality that in order to win, I've got to do anything, and that's what I do. I'll push my mum aside to get to that ball, to win the goal, or block the shot, or whatever it is. And yet we think that saying things off the cuff, it's the heat of the moment. Well, we still need to be able to control that as the coach, as the manager, because it affects people in the long term. And I think we could relate that to, however many of the managers that we know of that can only last at the club for a certain period, and they've pissed off enough people where they can't stay anymore because they can't get out what they're trying, because they've lost them as human beings.
I think we're definitely in agreement around an elite coach and what an elite coach looks like. If we go back to the Jordan quote about the equipment and the superficial stuff not being of primary importance in terms of success and development, if we look at the EPPP, the categorizations, category 1 to 4, this brought to light probably a focus more so on facilities in the first round of audits. So to identify who those clubs were going to be that were going to operate at category 1, they looked at things like you had to have an indoor facility, you had to spend a minimum of what, looking back now, was 2.5 million, but clubs far outspending that now. You know, the likes of the big six are probably, they dwarf that figure. So obviously the EPPP, that figure was established back in 2011. So there was a certain level of funding that you need to invest. I think the ratio of coaches was slightly less. It was 1-8. All the other categories was recommended at 1-10. Contact time was significantly more. I think it was a 46 week season, so probably training for longer, more extended periods. Staffing quotas, I think again back then was 18, but if you go to many Cat 1 academies, you would see a vast amount more than 18 full-time members of staff. But so these things that they've put in to say this is what would define you as a Cat 1, they seem to be the things that we're suggesting aren't as important. You know, the buildings, the things that you notice when you go in, the things that look nice and they catch your eye, but once that gloss, you know, fades, what are you left with? So we've seen Brentford, for example. They were Cat 2, spending 2 million a year on their academy, and they felt that they couldn't compete at that level. So they scrapped their academy and went to a B team model. Are we suggesting perhaps that it's not so much about the facilities and the resources, but it's about having a model or a program that you really believe in, and what does that look like? You know, it probably looks differently for each club and their context, but how can we look at a Cat 1 club in the north and see, well, that is elite, and look at a Cat 1 without just looking at the buildings and how pretty it looks?
It's how it's used, I think, is the easiest way to say it. I think if we go back to Howard Wilkinson, the best coach is the best environment. So if we state it as the environment, and it's not maybe the facility, it's not the house that you live in, it's how you're living within it. I think that's the better way. Unfortunately, there is an illusion of okay, well, we're spending this money. Spurs have, you know, how many hundreds of millions did they spend on their new facility?
The new stadium, I think it was a billion, wasn't it?
That's that facility. But then they have their training for their academy, and it will all go to waste if you have a manager in there that doesn't use or doesn't believe in the youth system and doesn't bring those players along and provide opportunities. You can have all these great things if you have a toxic environment in there. We're saying yes, people won't want to play. Their performance level is going to change based off of how they're being treated, what they feel in that environment. So the unfortunate part about being given all of the amenities is that it might produce, in some cases, players that don't want to or expect that everything's going to be given to them. So before I came here, I was working with the women's team at University of Alabama, and we are fortunate that we are attached to the most notable American football team at the university level. And they get millions upon millions. The facilities are ridiculous. We get to use their facilities. And each July, right before the season starts, we get given the kit bag. And oh my gosh, it's Christmas. It is the best thing ever. And what that does is when we give all the players, I mean, they get like literally 5 trainers, free pair of boots anytime they need them. Loads of jackets, hoodies, everything they can think of. But anytime we wanted them to compete in a training session, there was always, not always, there was, okay, we need to provide a little carrot with another hoodie that we've held off long enough for them to not know that it's out there. And it's a case of being able to have players that are hungry regardless. So here's Jordan saying it's not about the shoe, it's about what you're doing it in the shoe. And unfortunately, when you're providing all this stuff, some people become complacent. Not the elite level player, but many people. There's a reason why not everyone's elite. And so obviously the more we have 26 academies in the country, we're not going to have this, huge crop of just elite. There's going to be more people that are being given so much, and they've got to learn the hard work that takes to become elite.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about this previously. The English model is perhaps not reaping the full benefits, certainly at international level, of some of the players that are coming through the pathway. And that word that you use, hunger, I think that's a really important one, because if we link it to Rasmus Ankersen, who was director of Brentford and Michelin, if the people listening haven't read it, there's a book called The Goldmine Effect. So he went to a number of different venues around the world and looked at how they developed success and why were they successful. So Kenya, Ethiopia, Brazil, Russia, South Korea and Jamaica. And what he found was that there was this sustainable hunger. They didn't have the best facilities, they didn't have the best resources, but what they had was very skilled coaches and a hunger or desire to be the best and to continually improve. So it wasn't about all the superficial things that we see, the buildings, the kit, the nice stuff. It was more deeper rooted than that. It was intrinsic, and he found that those were the environments that produced some of the best athletes in the world. We look at Brazil. We referred to it a couple of weeks ago in our podcast. Probably the most players produced around the world come from Brazil. Mm-hmm. You look at some of their backgrounds, living in favelas and playing street football. It's not about the multi-million pound venues. It's more subtle than that, I think. And the word hunger that you used, there's a documentary on BT, No Hunger in Paradise, Michael Colvin, which is also in a book form as well. Are these players getting too much too soon? Are they feeling professional before actually achieving professional status? Do they think that they've made it as players because they've got all this stuff at their disposal?
There's that stat you used earlier from the research that players being given the international success at youth don't always make it to the top. The picture that I see when you're talking about this is Usain Bolt in the high grass, the most awful. It's not even a track. It's just an open field in Jamaica, and it's like, okay, fastest human ever, training in the absolute what we would consider, atrocious. I got to the point when you train, obviously you know this, when you train it at the best facilities, you go to a grassroots or just a normal pitch, a normal wherever, and you're looking down on it. You're like, this grass is too high. This is too thick. It's not gonna allow our dribblers to be able to do much. We're not gonna be able to pass. It's too bouncy. We become very finicky people. Because of the things that we're given, and that you're exactly right. Poverty and desire breeds, extreme success in many cases, and so we're painting this picture that yes, elite can come from both the disadvantage compared to the advantage, but what it takes to overcome that advantage is, I think, what we're getting to is this coaching, this culture. So you can have all of these great facilities as long as you are aware of what it breeds in terms of complacency and lack of desire. Maybe that maybe giving too much too soon means that a good coach, a good mentor, someone who is leading this charge has to be aware of it and then sets their own standard, creates their own culture to be able to counteract these obviously advantages that come in, because you have to use it. Man City spends what, 18 million, you said, on a year somewhere for their academy. Of course, someone in that area in Manchester is going to go, wait a minute, I can either go to this club or I can go to that club. Well, I'm going to be given all these other things. I'm going to be able to go, instead of going into cold tank, I can go into the cryosphere and get frozen there. Like, that's pretty cool. That, as a kid, as a family member, as a dad, that might be an attraction to want to go there. But it is about how you deal with it and the culture. That should be the one that you care about more than just the brick and mortar.
Yeah. I would imagine very few parents or players, when they're trying to be coaxed by an academy, will go in there and want to be around the people and see how they behave and how they interact. They'll probably just look at maybe the trophies in the cabinet, maybe the nice parent lounge that's on offer, the nice facilities that are available to them, and that probably is enough to turn their heads. But I think it's that level of support and challenge that we talked about that's really important, because in some of these nice environments it might have a taming effect on a player rather than a training effect. So that hunger may start to fizzle out, and we start to see that like burnout, I guess, because it just becomes normal for them. Whereas some players will need that support mechanism or structure around them. So we're not saying Cat 1s and Cat 2s aren't a good development environment. They're fantastic development environments. The level of provision that they offer and care that they can offer is, because of the numbers of staff and the resources available, is fantastic. Some players will want that and need that. Some players, however, will get comfortable in those environments. Some players in Cat 3 and 4 environments will need other things. They might enjoy the fact that they're on difficult pitches, because when it comes to playing on a carpet, it allows them to really step up and play some of their best football. And when they go and play in the FA Cup when they're older, they can deal with going to a League 2 team. And so everyone's different, and I think it's just understanding that what we're trying to provide is a menu of provision and trying to give them a well-balanced diet, if you like. But if all they ever get is wrapped in cotton wool and given the best of everything at a young age, perhaps that suggests that their diet is not balanced and they might be missing out on something. So when approaching this assignment, it's not just about taking the option where the most money, the most resources, the best infrastructure exists. It's actually looking with a more critical eye. Where can you get more value for money? Where can you get more value for experience? And where can you offer a more rounded menu and provision of resource for your players to make sure that you develop them holistically? Like I think you mentioned about in Manchester, the cluster of clubs in the northwest. There's a lot of offer. So if you get released from one club, it might be that you go to another. You might get released there. You go to somewhere else. What is that teaching a player? When we talked about trauma previously, we need those things sometimes to make us develop and help us develop. I think in the Midlands alone, there's 6 Cat 1 clubs, and we go back to Howard Wilkinson's quote about it's probably not enough talent in the country to support that. Is having 6 Cat 1 clubs in one area, in one small area of the country, is that productive?
Yeah, it definitely fits all within that hour-and-a-half radius for players to be able to fluctuate. Really, cotton wool was your go-to fine like material. I would have gone with silk, but that's just me. The attainment of elite for all players, whether it's the club trying to create elite players or it's the players trying to become elite. This definition, it's funny, the research article that we're dealing with this week, they come out and say, okay, we can definitely see elite and sub-elite through watching behaviors and decision making. It's really easy to see that. But they go on to say, all right, this is for 14-year-olds, Arsene Wenger's prime age. If they don't have it here, they're never going to be a footballer. But that's not a judgment for future potential. That was a judgment at that current moment. This is who is performing at that. And so, obviously, if we're talking about the elites, youth development, we're talking about more of the potential than we are the actual current. And so, how do we define elite with players in the current? What's our ability to say, okay, this person's elite? Is it the same as the coaches? Do we go into it and say, it's on success, so only winners get to be in that elite status?
It's in youth development, at least, it's very difficult, isn't it? Because we're naturally going to assess performance because we can see it, we can perhaps measure it to some degree. Potential is such a grey area. We don't know. Sometimes we don't know what we're looking at. We don't have a crystal ball to tell us what they're going to be like in the future. There was some research from Swan et al, and they put together this sort of framework of elite. So they tried to break it down into different structures, and it was related more to senior players. But they looked at 5 variables: so competitive standard, competitive success, experience. Again, we talked about that. Competitiveness. Again, that win-loss record, and then they also looked at global competitiveness of the sport. So if it was, so for example, football in England is the nation's primary sport, so it's very high on that global competitiveness. England as a nation tend to sit within that top 10 ranking in FIFA, so it tends to score quite high on that level. But they started to define it as or rank players into semi-elite, competitive elite, successful elite, or world-class elite. So I guess that definition, going back to the start about that percentile, the top percent, they would be those world-class elite. And then I guess the semi-elite or competitive elite, and perhaps even successful elite, they're the players that may be developing or have not quite reached that top like super level that we've referred to before. But to my knowledge, I don't know if there's anything that exists with youth players. I think what we do is we take the adult definition, the adult model, the adult way of doing things, and we just copy and paste and apply it to youth. And we know that that's not the best way of doing things.
Or we call them the next Ronaldo, the next Messi. Just put next in front of whatever, and that's the other way of calling them incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I agree. Obviously, we don't agree because we're talking about potential. And yet, we can talk about so many examples of people who were given too much pressure. Our American Freddie Adu, he signed with someone. I saw that.
Oh, really?
I want to say in Sweden he signed this week. So I guess he's like 18 now, maybe. I literally played against him at 14. It was the funniest thing. But we do that with so many players.
Yeah.
We attach that claim, and it just ruins their potential.
Yeah.
So if we clearly can't see the future that well in predicting these things. It's very hard to predict it. I mean, is it even worth talking about? Or, I mean, should we have youth internationals at 15 or 16?
Probably not. The research would suggest that the ones that actually play at that level, very few of them get to the top as seniors. So probably not. I think it's more for talent identification and trying to get players into a pathway and then trying to funnel them towards that. But we know that that's flawed. So yeah, I think there would be an argument not to have it. And then I guess also where those players are coming from. You look at a lot of these youth international teams and you see Chelsea, Arsenal, Tottenham, Man United, Man City, the big hitters. You see occasionally there's a player that's come through from maybe Shrewsbury or AFC Wimbledon or somewhere small.
And they don't stay there for much longer because they got identified, and then now the other club wants them. Yeah.
Yeah, which is why Brentford made the decision they did, that a lot of the players were getting poached and taken. So I think we probably just need to delve into these players' backgrounds. So how many of these players that are actually playing at senior level, like, you know, we talk about Dele Alli, we've used him as an example previously, but his background wasn't from, you know, it's more of a rags to riches story. He came through at MK Dons, you know, a cat-free academy, very humble, limited resources, but it gave him a platform that he could play senior level football at a younger age. There was less blockages in the pathway. It gave him opportunity, and on the back of that he then got a big money move and went to Tottenham. And the nice things in life came a little bit later for him, and that seems to be perfect for his. But how many of those are in the system? How many of these players are coming through from Cat 3s or having to be released at youth team level and go to a Cat 4 and get an opportunity in the first team before they then fulfil that potential that's in them? I'm sure there's many that are coming through Cat 2s and Cat 1s, but are they being signed at a later age? Are they there since foundation? And that's probably what we need to really dive into, is to get that information so we can then start to assess which one offers the best in terms of this hypothetical question that we've got for the assessment. Which one is the one that we want to back and go with? Because none of them are right and none of them are wrong. It's personal views on that. So with everything there's a trade-off. But if we go on Jordan's quote, you would say probably, you know, him would be more, he wants a Cat 3, a Cat 4 model. He wants to work hard and graft and his quality will come through. It's not about the equipment he's wearing, the resources that he's given. It's about him.
Yeah. But he did have the shoes.
He did.
He did have the endorsements. Not just Nike. Yeah, then Gatorade kind of spawned out of him as well.
But did the endorsements and the money come as a result of the success that he demonstrated through hard work, which got him to that position? Because we're now seeing I think on transfer deadline day they were talking about Loftus-Cheek moving to various clubs. I think Southampton were listed as one of those. But the stumbling block was his wages. You know, he's earning, I think it was reported, 6 figures. And Loftus-Cheek hasn't, he hasn't played 100 games in the Premier League. He hasn't, he's not a starter each week, but yet he's earning that money. So we're seeing it in football because of the money and the glamour and the glitz that's around it, that whereas Jordan had to really work hard and get all those things, and then the money came and the endorsements came afterwards. We're seeing now players coming through academies and they're already getting it before they've even made a name for themselves or become established professionals. So I guess that's the problem within football at the moment. How do we stop that in England when the money and commercial rights are there? I don't know.
Can you argue against him if his agent is able to, get those wages for him? I mean, what is it? The wages are what you can get and what the value tells you. So, yeah. Back to the quote. I'm obviously a fan of Michael Jordan. So he had it all. He created all of the glamour and the facilities and the whatevers because of his hard work. So he mixed in a little bit of everything, and he was going to work hard because he failed at his high school level. He was cut, and that trial and tribulation was the reason he became so ingrained into that training environment and who he surrounded himself with. He created that environment that we're seeking, that we're trying to produce in all of the academies, whether it's a Cat 1, Cat 2, Cat 3, or Cat 4. I think he would say, don't worry about those things. Worry about how you're going to create the environment and make the decision based off of your environment.
Yeah. and some people are going to make it irrespective of the environment they're put in. And I think he's one of those that, you said at the start, super talented, unbelievably gifted, but gifted because he worked very hard and created that for himself. So probably if you'd have put him in any environment, he would have probably still made it to the level that he did, because he was that driven. So it's a fantastic discussion and fascinating to look at all of this, because it is so murky and so grey, and it's not we can't define it really quickly. But what we're going to do next week is look at the other side of the coin and look at the Cat 3 and the Cat 4 environments and see how maybe that might be a different pathway for certain players.
Thanks for joining the conversation. If any of this has sparked an interest in you, check out the resources in the description below to find out more. May the myths be dispelled and the truth stick.